Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about the purchase application data, which showed 25% year-over-year growth this week and 9% week-to-week growth. We're going to dig into what is going on. Logan, welcome back to the podcast.
Wow. Boy, yesterday was drama. You wake up in the morning and purchase application data shows 25% year-over-year growth, coming off of a 16% year-over-year growth the previous week, which means, Sarah Wheeler, the nerd in me knows this, the only time in recent history where we had an average 2-week growth of over 20% was actually March and May of 2021. That's because we were working off the COVID-19 lows.
Wow.
That's when it started to crash back then. So we had well over 20% of year-over-year growth then. It was like in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But this has confused everyone. Because the week before, some people were saying, okay, purchase apps are up 16%. That's not going to continue. Everyone was anticipating a really, really withdrawal in the data. And not only was the year-over-year growth at a year-to-date high, the week-to-week was at 9%. So everyone kind of gave up. And those people that never really talked about purchase apps this year had to say something about it because it's a very glaring data line now. But for us, it's part of the weekly tracker. We talk about it all the time. We've been writing about it all the time. And we said, nobody talks about this, because I think half of the people can't doom porn by talking about people remember people saying, who's going to apply for a mortgage? Americans are poor. They're uneducated. They're on buy now, pay me later. Stock market's down, tariffs. And yet it's been the best growth in years. But we have to explain what this really means.
Right. No, I think, the title of your talk at the gathering was that the worst of the housing, crisis is over. The worst of the unhealthy market is over. And purchase apps were one of the reasons you were looking at. It's the data line that you were looking at that you're like, nobody pays attention to this. But if they were paying attention, they would see that it's been a tipping point.
You look at the history of housing economics going back decades. What do we always say here? This cycle is not 2008, but it kind of reminds me of the 1980s. And in the 1980s, affordability was worse. Home sales had a really huge crash. And then all of a sudden, rates fell. And then when rates fell, demand picked up. Twice, actually. There was 2 recessions back in the early 1980s, both times when rates fell and demand picked up. But the second time around, existing home sales hit such a low level. And after a few years, it doesn't go lower anymore. And that's kind of what's happened recently. We've run the 3-year gambit of home sales being at the lowest levels ever. But this is happening with elevated rates, with mortgage rates not below the trend that what we've seen in the past few years that grows purchase apps on a week-to-week basis. But this has been confusing this year because we've never really had year-over-year growth in purchase application data for a while now. We had a few weeks last year in October, but whenever the weekly data improves, people tend to ignore it because they don't see the year-over-year growth. Now, the weeklies are slightly positive, not very strong, but the year-over-year data is glaring, and I think everyone's just stuck. I think everyone is stuck, and nobody knows what to make out of it. Even some of the most bearish people are just not even touching this thing because it ruins their narrative. So my job today is to try to explain what this all means, because there's a story here it really gets to the nitty-gritty, nerdy work of purchase apps, but it can be explained because we usually see the seasonality of apps peak around May. Like after May, the total volumes fall. We don't see a vertical 25% move higher year to dates in July. That hasn't happened. So it just, on the charts that we show on the tracker, it just so glaring, what do you say? So we shorten the duration of purchase apps to just show the year-over-year data. And it's just almost like an alligator opening a jaw, the high end, low end. And we're going to have the year-over-year comps are actually going to get easier over the next few weeks. So just always remember that. But that was a shocker to a lot of people. Even people that I would consider to be authentic housing analysts are kind of like, well, this is so. Again, we need to explain this because there's a story here.
Well, let's talk about that story. So, from your perspective, does this show like, wow, mortgage demand is just so strong that it's overwhelming, even when rates are higher than people would like? They're like, I got to have a house. Like, what is it?
No, I think what's happened this year is the week to week data with purchase application data. So let's go back all the way to 2022. We've had three different times where rates have fallen and purchase application data gets better. The end of 2022 going to early part of 2023. The end of 2023 when mortgage rates were at 8% went all the way down to 6.3. Purchase apps got better. And then also last year. Last year, when mortgage rates peaked around April and then started to head lower, we went from 7.5% to 6% rates. That's not happening here. But what has occurred is we have such a low bar because of last year. Last year was a very, very negative year that it's created such an authentic, like the lowest bar ever in history. And then new listings data is positive this year. So because most sellers are buyers, there you go with the year-over-year growth. But the weekly data, I think we had 11 positive weeks, 9 negative weeks, and 5 flat weeks. So the week-to-week data isn't really like blowing it out of the water, but the year-over-year data is, and it's gotten back up to 2014, 2015 levels, which people were saying like, wait a minute, purchase apps are back in the 1990s. I said, yes, we went from House of Pain to Kate Perry within weeks. Like, how did that happen? And I show them the chart. They're like, what just happened? So everyone's just shocked because we moved up an entire decade, moved up actually 2 decades or a few decades in a very short amount of time. So I just believe that because we're working from the lowest levels ever recorded in the history of America, the new listings data is pushing this on a year-over-year side, where the weekly data is fine, but nothing spectacular. So I don't see this like the next existing home sales report is not going to have a blowout number or anything. But just remember, purchase apps look out 30 to 90 days. Before July the 4th weekend ruined our weekly tracker like it does every year, the data was actually stabilizing with rates near 7. Not seen that. It usually takes rates below 6.64. If this continues in the second half of the year and the forward-looking data stabilizes or gets better, and you all are waiting 6 to 9 months to get the data on this, that's on you. We provide the freshest weekly data. So back in 2022, late 22, it said, oh, the data is getting better. Nobody's going to care for 6 to 9 months. And all of a sudden, here's June 2023, home prices didn't crash. Everyone's like, what happened? Right at the end of 2023, the forward-looking data got better. Nothing spectacular. It was 8 weeks. We had a couple 100,000. Nothing great. Last year, I would say that the forward-looking data got noticeably better. The supply and demand equilibrium got so much better that my price forecast was wrong. So you as a human being cannot make this mistake 4 times if it happens. And this is why the tracker was created for these specific times, because if you looked at the headline, Sarah Wheeler, if somebody told you we had 23 straight weeks of year-over-year growth, 10 straight weeks of double-digit year-over-year growth, 25% year-over-year growth, you're thinking, oh my God, housing's doing great, housing's doing fine. But it's a very, very, very tricky year because the bar is so low. And just like how we talk about foreclosures, somebody was going, oh my God, foreclosures are up 700%. Homie, it was like 1 foreclosure, and now it's like 7. All right. You have to put context into it. And I just think that the purchase apps are working from the lowest bar ever, that the percentage of the year-over-year growth gets tainted a little bit to that.
Okay, so if I'm out there and I'm in mortgage, if I'm in real estate, whatever, like, do you feel like this is just a quirk of data and it doesn't come, it doesn't translate into actually like if you're out there, you can feel that this is changing and that things are better, or is it just a quirk of the data since it was so bad last year?
I think that when you have people selling their homes and the new listings data grows, they have to fill out an application. And that can explain the year-over-year growth. So that's legit. What do we always say? Supply is a function of demand in housing.
Right.
because that seller, that 70 to 80% of that seller is a buyer. Now, that 20 to 30% that isn't sells that house, never fills out an application, doesn't need to. Okay, so that's a different story. An investor, somebody's dead, whatever it is, that does not fall into the purchase application demand. Cash buyers as a percentage of sales are falling, right? So I don't even think existing home sales, what we've talked about, existing home sales should show year over year growth for the next 5 months, but it could stay flat at 4 million, just around there, and show year over year growth. That's where the difference is. But this is all happening with elevated rates. If mortgage rates head down to 6%, we're playing ball. If the Godzilla tariffs did not happen and we had those 3 weeks of negative data straight, if we didn't get the year would look a lot different on the weekly side. But we had those Godzilla tariffs, which if you see our tracker, you could see it. We just had 3 straight weeks, even though we had no negative year over year data. We had 3 noticeable week to week declines, and then it just came back up. So we're almost there. We're almost there to the point to where, as a country, if you just get down to 6% and stay there, we could push this forward. Not only that, housing permits could act better. The whole country would be in a better spot. This is the frustrating aspect about just 75 basis points on mortgage rates is holding this back. Of course, if I say sub 6% mortgage rates were growing sales, nobody's disputing that, just because the new home sales sector is at 2019 levels. But here, when we talk about the worst is over, that was the whole theme of the NER Tour this year. Now everybody's going, oh my God, Logan was right. We're not declining 20 to 25% or anything like that. So just imagine if rates went a little bit lower, demand picks up a little bit, and we start that process that we've seen in other cycles. But so far, rates have stayed elevated. But it is encouraging to me. It's so encouraging to me to see. This is why I love 2025. Inventory is growing. We got back to the low level of 2019. Purchase apps are growing. Americans do not act like middle-aged men, podcast stock traders, or people who push doom porn, right? They have lives. They go to work. They have sex. They eat great food. They live their lives like Americans do. But if you're one of the other group, you're thinking like, why are people filling out applications? Why aren't people as miserable as I am? Why are children playing out there in the parks? Why can't everybody just be as horrific as I am? Life finds a way. And even with elevated taxes, insurance, prices, rates, it just shows that we've kind of bottomed. We just need that next move lower in rates. And then the curve could look little bit better. Like if the weekly data was stronger, I can push this a little bit more aggressive like I've done the last few times. The weekly data isn't as strong as the year over year. The year over year I could explain, but wow, that was a shocker. Because if other media outlets are coming to me and they're like, what the hell is going on here? And I have to keep on updating this for CBS News. I guess what happened this week? They're like, what's this? It has completely shocked everyone. But the fact that purchase apps are back from the 1990s to 2014, 2015 does not mean existing home sales are back there. But just remember, 30 to 90 days out, that's what we're looking at. It eventually hits sales, so we'll keep an eye on the tracker. The tracker will confirm it through the weekly pendings like it did last year. Last year, we saw the weekly pendings picked up. We're like, oh, here it is. This is where apps got better. Now it hits the pendings. Now existing home sales are going to be the last. And what happened? Existing home sales went up a couple 100,000. Demand picked up a little bit. The supply and equilibrium. See, the supply and demand equilibriums of the weekly data matters more than everything else because that's the final confirmation. So it's just interesting that I saw 2 weeks of stabilization in housing. Then July the 4th came. We have one more week left before that data line gets that July the 4th 2-week period out. And then we could go back to it. And if just rates can fall, man, it just gets down half a basis points to 75 basis points. You got something you can work with because we've modeled this out before. And this is why we believe in showing people models and how to teach this. But I totally get why everyone is confused. Like everyone is just like looking, this is not normal. This can't be happening, you know.
I understand too. So, okay, let's talk about those rates. Let's talk about those rates. Okay, Trump wants rates like he wants a huge cut, but we don't see that happening, correct? Like, tell us where we are with rates.
So one of our things for Trump's presidency is that the dollar needs to go lower.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
so why
he wants the
he
dollar to go.
wants the U.S. dollar to go lower? No, I don't care what some of his people in the White House are saying. We're shocked that the dollars are no. The general policies are. So why would you want emergency rate cuts now? Because you want to crash the dollar even more. So why does Trump want a lower dollar? If you build a lot of stuff in America and the dollar is strong, it doesn't make that stuff cheaper to sell out and about. So you need to, if you want to export stuff, which I still to this day, I still can't comprehend why we want to do that. But if you want to do it, you need the dollar to go much lower than what it is right now. And you need other currencies to get better so they have a little bit more buying power for the stuff. Because listen, we're the wealthy country out there.
Right.
It's not like those penguins could be buying stuff from us, or in Vietnam they could buy these big trucks that we make. So it's one of these things where I have to keep convincing people this is a dollar story, this is a deficit story as well. If Trump collects, hypothetically, let's just say he collects 2.2 to 3 trillion dollars over the next 10 years through tariffs. I'm just go with me on this one. And then the Fed funds rate is lower, so you get more revenue, and then the interest payment of the deficit gets better. So we talked about this before, that one of the reasons why Trump wants lower rates is because the budget looks a lot better. So that can be a legitimate claim. But to this morning, he's like, we need 3%. That's emergency rate cuts. That's like what you do when COVID happened or something like that. So that's not going to happen. But then you and I joked about what Besant said.
Right.
Trump's like Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight, the former Indiana college basketball coach, he's got to work the refs. You got to work the refs. So we brought this up because I used to be a high school basketball coach. You got to work the refs, even though you don't get the calls you want all the time. If you get the Fed funds just a little bit lower, it makes your job a little bit easier. So a lot's going on with that out there. But one of the Fed presidents today made a statement that we believe that the tariff inflation will start in June, which means game on, baby. That's next week. So when we talked about the second half of 2025 is going to be one hell of a period. The Fed has now staked its claim on inflation picking up for the next 6 months. Inflation has to pick up for them to warrant all this. Now that's the fight that people are having between Trump's team and the Federal Reserve. I, on the other hand, says it didn't matter if tariffs were here or not. They weren't going to cut more than 2 times anyway, because in the Fed minutes that just came out this week, they said, well, we don't believe we're that far from neutral policy. So even if inflation goes down, maybe we don't cut that much anyway. Of course, because this is about the labor market, not inflation. So you would have got 2 rate cuts with tariffs. You would have got 2 rate cuts without tariffs. Don't let the Fed trick you. They don't want to go there until they see the labor market break.
This is what's confusing to me, because we've talked about labor over inflation for a couple of years. Labor over inflation, labor over inflation. So why are they bringing up inflation now?
Cover.
For what?
They don't want to cut. They don't want to cut more than 2 times. So one of the things that we wrote a few years back, we said the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, that eggnog must have had some really good spike in it, man. They will stay as yeah.
Maybe explain the backstory there. Before Christmas in 2022.
Before Christmas, Jerome Powell came on TV and he said, we would like the Fed funds rate to match 3, 6, 12-month core PCE. And I'm like, whoa, that's actually really good. I'm down with that plan. And then that means the Fed funds rate is 2.5%, 3% right now. Then I caught a whiff of, they changed the entire game plan. Something happened in some meeting. They spiked his drink and he's like, no, we are going to go labor over inflation and we're not going to do anything until the labor market breaks. So naturally, a lot of people were told that the growth rate of inflation will fall, mortgage rates didn't happen. But Fed policy didn't change. The only time they started cutting is where they're like, oh man, the labor market's getting softer. Okay, let's start doing it. Here, They're literally telling you this in interviews. They said, well, we'll play catch up. We'll wait to see the data and we'll play catch up because the whole game plan changed in 2022. So they're waiting to see. And now they're like, oh, tariffs. Yeah, tariffs. Tariffs are inflationary for 6 months. Okay, well, it's going to come in a second. Okay, so they're using this as cover, but they would have cut only twice without tariffs anyway. And they told you that in the Fed minutes, even though there's a little civil war between a few of the conservative Fed presidents versus the other ones. I still say they only would have cut twice. They are going to slowly get to neutral policy until the labor. And when the labor market breaks, like, oh, okay, then we'll start cutting and we'll change it up. Housing outperforms in that environment, but this was going to be a drag. This is why we brought this up at the end of 2022. And here we are in July 2025. It's like, pulling teeth out. Just get the neutral policy. And you're like using ancient teeth stuff back in the 1700s to pull your teeth out, just like crack it out. Like, no, it's labor over inflation.
Horrible. Okay, I don't even want to think about that. I hate teeth stuff. Okay, everybody does. I'm sure nobody likes going to the dentist. We are out of time. I can't even believe it. I'm so glad you got to celebrate what is going on with the purchase apps. You have been so consistent about like it was one of the first things that you put in the tracker because you're like, this is important to track every single week. And many people are like, what? Why would we do that? It's not the sexiest data line. But I'm so glad that you got to explain what's going on, and because it's all of a sudden becoming very relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the takes that aren't correct is people are saying this is a booming sales curve, and again, our weekly pending home sales data doesn't show that. Now, maybe 2 months down the line, things change. Last year, purchase apps out of the 18 weeks, we had 12 positives, 5 negatives, 1 flat. That weekly was very positive. That's a much more positive curve than we have this year on the weekly data. And we said it'll eventually get to sales, and it eventually did. End of 2022, we had 12 straight weeks of positive purchase applications. Home sales were still falling, and everyone's like, no, purchase apps are not showing anything. All of a sudden, we had 500,000 home sales in one month. It was like all
Right.
fell in 1 month. I was like, what? And then even at the end of 2023, we only had 8 weeks of positive data. That's not big enough for me. You need at least 12 weeks. But it gave us a couple 100,000 more home sales. But we need that weekly data to confirm it. Then if you have the positive weeklies, positive year over years, then positive weekly pending subs, oh my God, the tracker tracks all of that stuff. And just remember, we are months ahead of the NAR. It's an
Right.
unfair advantage we have. But at least this way, everyone gets a heads up. And then on the rate situation, again, labor over inflation, jobless claims came out today. Initial jobless claims fell, but the continuing claims are at a 3-year high. That just means the labor market's getting softer, but not breaking yet. And the Fed tracks jobless claims. Initial claims is their kind of the bread and butter on this when they feel like they need to start acting aggressively.
So nothing, they don't feel that right now.
A softer labor market, wage growth is slowing down for them. This is what they wanted always. Softer but not breaking. They can take us to neutral faster. They choose not to because that was their game plan at the end of 2022.
Logan, thank you so much. Great to talk to you multiple times this week. We will talk again soon. Have a great night. Thanks.